Late in March, the Atlanta sun cast a golden sheen on every glass panel of the newly inaugurated Children's Medical Center. The sound of the cut ribbon echoed in the crisp air, followed by bursts of applause and the hum of congratulatory chatter. Ethan Walker, a renowned tech entrepreneur and founder of the CareSync health platform, stood in the front row, a perfectly tailored gray suit hugging his frame, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand. To everyone else, he was the embodiment of generosity and success. But only he knew the truth. Beneath the fine wool and applause was a heart-splintering beat by beat. That morning, Ethan opened the final envelope with the medical results before coming here. A cold red stamp on white paper read, "Irreversible infertility." Every last shred of hope for a miracle had vanished. There would be no child to call him father, no eyes reflecting his own, no laughter echoing his blood. He still showed up at the inauguration, as planned, but inside him was a silent, expanding void. He was trying to smile at the chief of pediatrics when an image crossed his vision and shattered the smile instantly. Across the room, beneath the warm lights on pale wooden floors, stood a woman in a white coat. Her long curls were tied low, her deep brown skin glowing in the golden hour. She bent down to speak softly to two small children, a boy and a girl, about 4 years old. And when she straightened, her eyes locked onto Ethan like a memory detonating in real time. Layla Brooks. He had never imagined he'd see her again. Not after what had happened. Not after 5 years of absolute silence, like a sealed goodbye. Layla froze. Beneath the pale lip gloss and long coat, her face still carried the calm he once loved, but her eyes flickered with something hard to name: surprise, guardedness, and maybe sorrow. But what nearly made Ethan drop his champagne wasn't her. It was the two children holding tightly to her hands, like two halves of a missing soul. The little girl had Layla's dimples. The boy... Ethan swallowed. Those eyes. His eyes. That same misty gray, unmistakable. Ethan suddenly felt the whole room tilt. His heart slammed painfully in his chest. The girl looked up at him, her gaze unwavering, and then whispered, "Daddy?" The glass slipped from Ethan's hand. All sounds blurred into a murmur, like being submerged underwater. He turned quickly, weaving through the crowd still buzzing with conversation. His heart, the one supposedly incapable of creating life, was now screaming silently with a pain he didn't have words for. He stumbled into the hallway, his back against the wall, his hand trembling on his chest. "No way," he repeated to himself. But those eyes, that voice, could they lie? Dear reader, there are moments when everything you believed shatters in a breath. When you think you've mapped the limits of who you are, fate flips the page and redraws the lines. Ethan Walker had accepted he'd never be a father. But destiny and Layla disagreed. What would you do? Would you forgive if someone you once loved returned, bringing children who carry your eyes? Would you run, or would you face the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to follow this emotional journey, tap like and follow Love and Horizons, where stories aren't just told, they're felt. See you in part 2, where truth begins to surface through the cracks of the past. The fluorescent lights of the emergency unit hummed steadily, a sterile hum that had never once stirred Ethan's nerves, until now. He blinked against the brightness overhead, the stiff linen of the hospital bed beneath him, a far cry from the plush conference chairs he usually occupied. His chest still ached, not just from the episode, but from the question that now pulsed louder than any monitor beside him. Those eyes, that voice, that impossible word. Daddy. A nurse crept beside him, checking his IV drip, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Walker," she said gently. "You fainted. Mild cardiac arrhythmia, likely stress-induced." He opened his mouth, but no words came. Just air, thick and dry. "You should rest," she added, and left the room with professional grace, pulling the curtain halfway behind her. Ethan stared at the ceiling. The room was painfully quiet, but inside him, a storm raged. Confusion, hope, guilt, disbelief. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not in a hospital bed, not wondering if the children of the woman he once loved were somehow his. A soft knock broke the silence. Dr. Raj Patel entered, clipboard tucked under one arm. His calm, measured steps were those of someone who had seen lives fall apart in silence and slowly rebuild in defiance. "Ethan," he greeted. "You scared everyone." Ethan tried to sit up but winced as the movement tugged at the wires on his chest. Patel pulled up a stool. "I ran your vitals. You're stable, but your body is asking for a pause. You've been running on fumes." Ethan nodded faintly. "She was here," he said. "Layla." Patel's brows lifted slightly. "She brought you in herself. Stayed until we confirmed you were out of danger. Then she left." The room swayed again, though he was lying flat. "I need to ask you something," Ethan said, voice barely above a breath. "The children. Did she—" Patel hesitated, then slowly opened the file in his hands. "I checked," he said quietly. "Layla gave birth to twins 4 years ago. A boy and a girl. Both are listed under the last name Walker." Ethan's breath caught. "She never changed it," the doctor added. "Not even after your split. But I was told I couldn't." Ethan's voice cracked. "They told me I'd never—" "I know," Patel said, resting the file on his lap. "But life doesn't always follow diagnoses. We see it constantly. People defying statistics, bodies rewriting stories we thought were written in stone." Ethan turned his head, eyes wide with something too complicated to name. "So, they're mine." "By every indication, yes." His throat clenched as a sudden rush of emotions barreled through him. There were no words big enough for what he felt. He had thought Layla left because she no longer believed in them. He had spent years justifying her silence with narratives that made sense to his pride. But none of them had prepared him for this. "She never told me," he whispered. "Maybe she wanted to protect you," Patel offered. "Or herself, or the children." Ethan closed his eyes. Memories bloomed uninvited. Layla laughing at the zoo, brushing cotton candy from her lips. Layla curled up in his apartment, reading bedtime stories to no one but herself. Layla, the day she gave him back the ring, tears like tiny daggers in the corners of her eyes. "I can't promise away my dreams," she had said, and he had let her walk away, believing he had nothing more to give. But now, there were children, not ideas, no regrets, not medical charts. Children, breathing, alive, real, his children. Later that night, alone in the dim hospital room, Ethan reached for his phone. He stared at the screen for a long time before tapping her name. It rang straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. He lowered the phone onto his chest, breath shaking. "Layla," he whispered into the air. "You had my world, and I never even knew it." He didn't sleep, not really. He drifted in and out of shallow dreams, haunted by a little girl's whisper and a boy's steady, familiar eyes. At dawn, He rose from the bed with effort, pulling the blanket aside like armor. He wasn't the man who once walked away from love in silence. He wasn't sure who he was anymore, but he knew this. He had to see her again. Not for confrontation, not for closure, for the truth, and, if the universe allowed, for a beginning. Before the silences and the misunderstandings, before diagnoses and broken engagements. A spring afternoon was under a cotton-white tent in South Atlanta, and Ethan Walker had never looked so out of place. He was wearing a suit too formal for the community fundraiser and holding a donation check that felt heavier than it should. His assistant had arranged the photo ops, the press releases, and the branded banners. But no one had prepared him for her. Layla Brooks stood near the juice stand, crouched beside a small group of children from the pediatric cancer unit. Her lab coat flapped gently in the breeze, the volunteer badge pinned askew on her chest. One child handed her a paper butterfly, grinning toothlessly, and Layla laughed. A sound Ethan had only ever heard in dreams he couldn't name. She was tying ribbons around gift boxes, her hands quick but gentle, her presence the calmest point in the chaos. He watched her from a distance, something shifting inside him. Not a recognition, they'd never met, but a quiet certainty. She looked up, sensing his gaze. He smiled and stepped forward. "Dr. Brooks?" he asked, voice low, measured. She blinked up at him, startled, but not unsettled. "Yes? I'm Ethan Walker. We're funding the mobile care units." Her smile widened, warmer than polite. "The CEO who sent 50 teddy bears to our ER during flu season?" "I overheard you were short," he said, offering a sheepish head tilt. "I remember," she laughed. "We named one of them Mr. Grumpy. He mysteriously disappeared every time we had night shift." That afternoon, they walked side by side around the fundraiser lawn. Ethan had never done that, not without an agenda. But there was something about Layla that softened the edges of his world. Where he usually guarded his words, with her, he found himself speaking about more than quarterly projections or market share. She asked questions without hesitation. What kept him up at night? Why did he start CareSync? When was the last time he cried? He answered more than he should have. After the event, he offered to walk her to her car. She suggested a small coffee shop 2 blocks down, a place she said had the best peach cobbler in the city and only played vinyl jazz. There was no press, no handlers, just 2 people trying not to admit that something quiet and dangerous was unfolding between them. They sat at a corner table by the window, a tiny slice of pie between them. Ethan wore a dark blue sweater that made him look far more like a literature professor than a CEO. Layla pulled off her gloves slowly, hands tired from the day. He noticed a thin scar near her knuckle. She saw his habit of tapping the edge of his mug when he thought too hard. "I come here after tough cases," she said, slicing the crust with the side of her fork. "Sometimes I just sit and watch the steam rise from the coffee." "Boardroom battles leave bruises too," he murmured, "but the kind no one sees." "Then maybe we should stop pretending we're unbreakable," she said. He looked at her, then looked, and saw not just a woman who saved lives, but one who had learned to carry her pain with grace. He reached across the table, and she didn't pull away. That evening, they walked along the edge of the Chattahoochee River. The water mirrored the dusk, warm and slow. Under the bridge, Layla paused, arms crossed over her chest. "You know," she said, eyes on the current, "I used to believe love had to ache to be real. It had to sting somewhere deep, or it wasn't true." Ethan didn't respond right away. The wind lifted a curl from her cheek, and he tucked it back without thinking. "And now?" he asked quietly. She met his gaze. Now, I think maybe real love heals more than it hurts. He touched her hand. Then let's find out together. And for a while, they did. Through that spring and into summer, Ethan and Layla built something that defied their differences. Her fridge began to fill with his favorite teas and the exact brand of oat milk. His sterile penthouse grew softer. Books, throw blankets, a framed picture of her from the zoo holding cotton candy, and laughing so hard she was out of focus. She learned that he hummed in the shower. He learned she could never fall asleep if the room had a ticking clock. They spent Sundays reading on opposite ends of the same couch, feet tangled beneath a shared blanket. He spoke of growing up with a mother who wanted him to be invincible. She told him about bouncing between foster homes, about never owning anything that felt permanent. One night on his rooftop, under the silver light of Atlanta's skyline, Layla whispered, "I never knew what safety felt like until you." He kissed her forehead and answered, "I never knew what it meant to be seen." They were not perfect, but they were possible, until the first shadow arrived. It came dressed in polite dinner conversation, seated beside his mother at the family table, who smiled too sweetly and said too loudly, "You know, Ethan always dreamed of having a son to carry the family name." Layla smiled, bit her tongue, hid the sting. Afterward, she leaned against the car in the parking lot and asked softly, "Do you want children?" Ethan stared at the pavement. "I can't," he finally said. She blinked. "What? I've known since I was 28. 3 different specialists confirmed it." Her eyes welled, but her voice stayed steady. "Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to lose you." "You lost me anyway," she whispered. And in that moment, standing beneath the orange glow of a street lamp, the space between them stretched too wide to cross. She didn't scream, didn't throw the keys. She just touched his face gently and said, "I love you." But love without truth isn't love. It's theater. And then, slowly, she walked away. He didn't chase her. He told himself he was giving her space. But some of them believed he didn't deserve her anymore. Late September in Atlanta is a gentle shift. Summer is reluctant to leave. Autumn is soft in its arrival. The trees hadn't turned yet, but the mornings carried a different weight. Layla could feel it in her chest, in the silence of her apartment, in the slow, careful way she folded Ethan's sweatshirt and placed it at the back of the closet. He hadn't called, not once, and she hadn't either. It wasn't pride that held her back. It was quieter, more fragile, like standing on cracked ice and knowing one more step might send everything beneath her crashing down. So she moved through her days with precise rhythm. Work, rounds, home, shower, wine she rarely drank, sleep she never fell into. On the 7th night, she was awake at 2 a.m., seated on the floor by her bookshelf, knees drawn to her chest. His mug was still on the counter. His scarf still hung by the door, untouched. How do you erase someone who had woven himself into the quiet corners of your life? She didn't know the answer. So she cried. Not in great, shaking sobs, just silently, until the fabric of her t-shirt was soaked and the floor beneath her felt like the only solid thing she could rely on. Then came the dizziness. At first, she thought it was the lack of sleep, or how she'd skipped dinner again. But it returned the next afternoon during her shift, midway through checking a toddler's vitals. She gripped the side of the rolling tray, trying not to sway. "Dr. Brooks?" a nurse asked. "You okay?" Layla nodded, forcing a smile. "Just lightheaded. Long day." But that night, alone in her bathroom, she sat on the tub's edge, staring at a plastic test strip in her hand. Her fingers trembled. She turned it over slowly, as if the outcome might have changed if she had been gentle enough. 2 lines. Bold. Unmistakable. She was pregnant. For a long time, she didn't move. Just stared at it as if it might vanish. Then, slowly, her free hand moved to rest over her belly, the other still holding the test. She whispered, "How?" The universe didn't answer. But something deep within her, something instinctual and fierce, stirred. The echo of Ethan's voice returned to her, hollow and certain. "I can't have children." She remembered how his hands had trembled when he told her, how ashamed he'd looked, like he was confessing to a crime instead of a diagnosis. She had believed him. She still did. But the lines didn't lie. The next day, the test tucked away in her purse like a secret, Layla walked through the hospital's pediatric wing in a daze. Kids ran down the hallway laughing, pulling IV poles like race cars. She smiled at them, nodded at their parents, and charted vitals on her clipboard. But inside her, a storm raged. In the staff lounge that evening, Sophie noticed her staring blankly at the vending machine. "Are you okay?" she asked. Layla didn't answer. She just handed her the test. Sophie's eyes widened. "Wait, is it Ethan's?" Layla nodded. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." Sophie sat beside her on the couch, their knees touching. "He needs to know." Layla looked down at her hands. "What if he doesn't believe me? What if he thinks I'm trying to trap him, or punish him, or—" "Layla," Sophie interrupted gently. "He has the right to decide what kind of man he wants to be. You don't get to protect him from the truth." "But I remember his face," Layla whispered. "When he told me, I remember how much it broke him." Sophie touched her wrist. "You still love him?" Layla didn't answer, because the silence said enough. She told no one else, not her mother, not her colleagues. The pregnancy became a private rhythm, measured in heartbeats and cravings, the shifting of her waistline, the flutter beneath her ribs. At 12 weeks, an ultrasound revealed 2 small, perfect heartbeats. Twins. Her world tilted again, and then steadied. She began to prepare, not extravagantly, just enough. The second bedroom became a nursery painted in soft, warm tones. She bought 2 cribs, plush blankets, and identical giraffe toys. She chose names quietly. Micah, meaning who is like God, and Nova, for the bright explosion of something new. Names that meant light, and change, and maybe even hope. She documented everything. First kicks, late-night cravings, the way she'd burst into tears at a cereal commercial. Her phone held secret photos of her growing belly, and her journal carried letters she hadn't sent. Pages filled with words like, "You don't know them yet, but they already look like you," or, "Your daughter hates green beans. She gets that from me." Labor came in the early hours of a January morning. Snow had dusted the city overnight, a rare hush over the skyline. Layla was alone in her hospital room, hands gripping the bed rail, breath ragged as the contractions pulled through her like waves of fire. She refused to call anyone, not Sophie, not her mother, certainly not Ethan. When Micah arrived, she cried. When Nova followed minutes later, she wept harder. But when both babies were placed on her chest, their tiny bodies warm against her skin, something in her broke wide open and rearranged itself. She was no longer just a woman who had loved and lost. She was a mother, and that was more than enough. Even if it had to be enough alone. There was no dramatic return to normal. No parade of visitors or celebratory dinners. Just Layla, in a dim room with soft lullabies playing from a speaker barely louder than her breath. Micah and Nova slept in matching bassinets pushed close to her bed, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The nurses had offered to take them for the night. She declined. She wanted to memorize every breath, every sound, the way Nova twitched her nose when dreaming. Micah curled his fingers around the edge of his blanket like he was already holding on to something he didn't want to let go of. In the stillness, she whispered to them, not as a doctor or a woman once engaged to a man who vanished into the shadows of his shame, but as a mother. A mother is learning everything from the start. The following days passed in a haze of sleepless hours, and moments so complete they threatened to spill over. There were bottles sterilized in the quiet glow of kitchen lights, lullabies hummed between yawns, and moments. Layla would stop in the hallway to make sure the twins were still breathing. She adjusted, slowly. The nights were the hardest when the twins would cry in turns, sometimes together, when her body ached from exhaustion and her heart ached from absence. Sometimes, she would stare at her phone in the dark, Ethan's number highlighted on the screen. Her thumb would hover just above the call button, and then she would put it away, tuck it into a drawer as if hiding it could dull the ache. She hadn't told him. She didn't even know if she still could, but there was never a day when she didn't think about it. By spring, the apartment had transformed. The second bedroom became a world of soft color and gentle light. There were finger paintings on the fridge, well, colorful smears at best, diaper bags by the door, tiny shoes by the doormat, lined up beside her own. She returned to work part-time at the hospital. The pediatric floor welcomed her back like a familiar song. Her colleagues smiled with knowing glances. No one asked about the father. She didn't offer. It wasn't shameful. It was something else, an instinct to protect, to keep the fragile magic she had built from being touched by questions she wasn't ready to answer. And then came Malcolm. It began quietly. A new attending cardiologist transferred from Charleston, late 30s, thoughtful eyes. The kind of man who listened without interrupting, who asked questions not to fill silence, but to understand it. They crossed paths in the break room first. He made the worst cup of coffee she'd ever tasted and offered it to her with a crooked smile. "I haven't figured out the machine," he said sheepishly, "but I figured the gesture counts." She sipped it, winced, and smiled anyway. They didn't talk about children at first, or pasts, or scars. They talked about music, books, the best Thai takeout near the hospital. He asked her out for lunch one day. She hesitated, then agreed. A short break between shifts turned into a walk through Grant Park, takeout boxes balanced in one hand, coffee cups in the other. Later that evening, she smiled as she put the twins to bed. She didn't call it anything, not yet. But Malcolm kept showing up. He brought groceries when she looked too tired to cook and picked up a second pack of diapers without her asking. Read bedtime stories when her voice had gone hoarse. Micah adored him. Nova watched him with quiet curiosity, then offered him her favorite plush giraffe, a gift, one she had never shared. Layla let him in, carefully, piece by piece. There were no grand declarations, just moments, stacked like bricks, quiet, consistent, steady. One night, over Chinese takeout in her kitchen while the twins slept, Malcolm asked, "Do you want more?" She blinked. "More what?" "Of this," he said, gesturing softly around the room. "Of us." She didn't answer immediately, because somewhere inside her, a name still echoed in silence. She hadn't spoken Ethan's name aloud in over 2 years, not even to herself. But he was there, in Micah's eyes, in Nova's questions, in the way her daughter tilted her head when she didn't understand something, just like he used to. Still, She had built something beautiful. Not perfect, not flashy, but real. She and Malcolm eventually married in a quiet civil ceremony. No big dress, no cake. Just a courthouse, a rainy Tuesday, and two toddlers who held their parents' hands like anchors. He never asked about the past, and she never volunteered it. But there were nights, rare and wordless, when she would slip into the twins' room long after they had fallen asleep and stand there watching them, and wonder, not with regret, but with a softness, a mourning for what might have been. Still, she stayed forward-facing until the day came when fate looped around again. A hospital board event. Recognition for pediatric staff. Malcolm had a meeting. Layla brought the kids on her own. Micah wore a bow tie he had picked himself. Nova clutched a folded drawing, her thank you to the hospital. Layla held their hands as they walked across the marble floor, the echoes of their small shoes trailing behind her like ghosts of all the steps she'd taken alone. She didn't know he would be there, didn't see him until it was too late. Ethan. Standing on the far side of the room, older, leaner, but unmistakably him. He turned. Their eyes met. Time didn't stop. It twisted. He saw her, and then he saw them. And the world, once again, shifted on its axis. Ethan didn't recognize them at first. The room was crowded, softened by candlelight and murmurs of polite conversation. Waitstaff in black and white wove expertly through the crowd, balancing champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres trays. His mind had already begun to blur everything into noise. But then, he heard it. A laugh. Not loud, not even particularly unique, but it pierced through the soundscape like a tuning fork striking his spine. A child's laugh, high and lilting, unfiltered in its joy. It echoed something long ago that belonged to no one in this room except the past. He turned. Across the ballroom, just beyond the sculpted floral display, a little girl with soft brown curls and wide, searching eyes twirled in a circle, a folded drawing clutched in one hand. Beside her, a boy stood straighter, more cautious, his fingers gripping the edge of his blazer. His gaze scanned the crowd like he was deciphering something important. Ethan froze. Those eyes. They were his. The boy blinked, and Ethan felt the floor shift beneath him. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. His champagne tilted slightly in his hand. Forgotten. Then she stepped into view. Layla. No lab coat this time. Just a simple navy dress that fell just below the knee, her hair pinned in soft waves, her face turned toward the children, toward his children. She bent down, adjusting the boy's collar. He leaned into her touch instinctively. The girl reached up to hand her the drawing. It was a picture of the hospital, with stick figures holding hands and a bright yellow sun beaming in the corner. Ethan stepped back, heart thudding so hard he swore it echoed through his ribs. She looked up. Their eyes met. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, like the hush before a storm. You could already smell in the air. Layla straightened slowly, expression unreadable. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing. The boy tugged at the edge of her dress. "Mommy," he whispered, "is that the man from your picture?" Ethan's stomach dropped. Layla swallowed. She didn't answer right away. Then finally, softly, "Yes." The girl turned, eyes scanning him with a curiosity that only children possess, unafraid, unfiltered. She stepped forward, just a few feet. "Are you my daddy?" she asked, voice delicate as tissue paper. Ethan dropped his glass. It didn't shatter. It thunked against the carpet, rolled slightly, and settled sideways. But the sound inside him was deafening. "I need to go," he muttered, barely audible, stumbling backward. Layla called after him, "Ethan, wait." But he was already gone. Down the corridor, past the catering station, past the polished oak doors of the auditorium, Ethan moved like a man chased by something he couldn't name. The crowd faded. The walls blurred. The thrum in his ears became deafening. He reached the far end of the west wing and leaned against the wall, hand pressed to his chest. His knees buckled. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. Not again. Not here. The pain was sharp, radiating down his left arm, wrapping around his ribs. He slid to the floor, his shoulder knocking against a decorative bench. The hallway around him felt too bright, too narrow, too late. When the beeping started, he didn't hear it. When he woke, the ceiling tiles above him were unfamiliar. He blinked. A monitor pulsed beside him. The rhythm it tracked was his. A nurse noticed his eyes flutter open and leaned in. "Mr. Walker, you're back with us. You had a mild cardiac episode. You're stable now." He didn't respond, just stared past her at the sterile white wall. Then the door opened. Dr. Patel. Of course, it would be him. He approached quietly, clipboard lowered. "Second time in a few months. Your heart's giving you warnings, Ethan." "I saw them," Ethan rasped. "I saw her. I saw them." Patel sat beside the bed. "She stayed with you in the ambulance, waited until you were stable, then left." Ethan turned his head, eyes hollow. "The boy. His name?" "Micah," Patel said gently. "His sister is Nova." "Micah. Nova." The names sounded like air, like hope, like something he had no right to want. "I reviewed her file," the doctor added. "You were listed as next of kin at the time of birth. The birth certificates say Walker." Ethan closed his eyes, lids fluttering. "She never took your name off," Patel continued. "Not even after everything. I lived for years thinking I couldn't be a father," Ethan whispered. "That I didn't have it in me, biologically, emotionally, spiritually. I thought I was defective." The silence stretched. "Maybe she believed differently," Patel said. "She didn't tell me. Maybe she thought she was protecting you." Ethan looked away, or protecting herself. That night, lying in the dim light of the recovery room, Ethan asked for his journal. He turned to a blank page, the pen trembling in his hand. "Micah, Nova, I saw you today, and I broke in a way I didn't know was still possible. You are miracles, and I don't know what I did to miss everything. But I want to know you." He paused, not as the man who disappeared, but as the man who wants to learn how to stay. He didn't know if he would ever give them the letter, but writing it steadied him. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was writing to ghosts. The rain had started sometime after midnight, light at first, just enough to blur the edges of the city's amber streetlights. By dawn, it was steady, tapping softly against Layla's bedroom window, like it had a message she didn't want to hear. She hadn't slept. Not really. Nova had fallen asleep, curled on her left arm and Micah on her right, their little bodies tangled against hers as if instinctively sensing something in her had shifted. She lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, the warmth of her children anchoring her, even as her thoughts drifted into places she hadn't allowed herself to go in years. Ethan had called 3 times. She hadn't answered. She couldn't. Not yet. She'd felt her hands go cold when she saw his name flash across the screen. Her chest had tightened, that old ache creeping back, the one she thought had long since been dulled by time, by motherhood, by moving on. But nothing about that moment in the hospital ballroom felt distant. Not the way his eyes widened when he saw Nova, not the devastation written in every line of his body when he fled, and not the silence that followed. It wasn't anger that kept her from calling back. It wasn't bitterness. It was the uncertainty of what came next. How do you open the door to a past you've spent years learning how to live without? Downstairs, the coffee pot beeped faintly. Malcolm was in the kitchen, moving with his usual quiet rhythm, preparing breakfast for the twins. He knew something had shifted. Of course he did. Layla had told him everything, or nearly everything. She came down an hour later, her robe pulled tight around her, hair still damp from the shower she'd taken in hopes of clearing her thoughts. The twins were at the table, Nova drawing rainbows on a napkin, Micah carefully picking the blueberries out of his pancakes. Malcolm looked up when she entered. His smile was gentle, as always, but something was behind his eyes, a question he didn't voice. He poured her coffee and handed her the mug without a word. They sat silently for a moment, the domestic sounds of forks clinking and juice slurping filling the space. Finally, he spoke. He saw them, he said, not looking at her. Layla nodded. He collapsed. At the event. Malcolm's hand stilled around the handle of his mug. He's okay, she added quickly. Stable. The doctors said it was stress-related. Did you talk to him? I tried. He tried. I wasn't ready. Malcolm leaned back slightly. His expression remained calm, but she could see the questions forming beneath the surface, questions he had every right to ask. Do you still love him? The question hung there, suspended between them like something fragile. Layla didn't answer, not with words. How do you explain that love never disappears? It just changes shape. It becomes quieter, tucked beneath layers of daily life and new beginnings, but never truly gone. I'm not asking for a decision, Malcolm said softly. I just want you to know, if you need space, I'll step aside. Her eyes welled unexpectedly. She reached across the table, resting her fingers lightly on his. You don't have to, she whispered, but I can't pretend this didn't happen. Malcolm nodded, his thumb brushing her knuckles once before he stood to help Micah with more syrup. That night, after the twins had gone to bed, after teeth had been brushed, and bedtime songs half sung and soft giggles finally faded into the hum of sleep, Layla sat alone in the living room, her phone resting like a weight beside her. She turned it over twice, then tapped the screen. No missed calls, but a voicemail. Her thumb hovered for a breath before she pressed play. Ethan's voice came through, quiet and unsteady. Layla, I don't even know where to begin. I don't know what to say that doesn't sound selfish or broken. But I saw them. I saw their eyes. Hearing her call me Daddy nearly stopped my heart. I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you. I need to see you. I need to know who they are, even if it's only once. Please. The message ended. Nothing dramatic. No demands. Just breathe at the edge of apology. She didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, the sun broke through the gray, slicing across the lawn in soft golden ribbons. The world outside looked deceptively calm. Layla dressed the twins in their Saturday clothes. Nova in a sundress with strawberries. Micah in shorts, and his favorite dinosaur tee. She didn't explain why she'd packed a small lunch or braided Nova's hair more carefully than usual. At 10 on the dot, she heard the doorbell. She opened it slowly. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, with no security or driver waiting at the curb. Just him. He wasn't in a suit. He wore jeans and a navy button-down. The sleeves rolled to his forearms. There were circles under his eyes, but he looked more present than she'd seen him in years. "I thought I'd wait in the garden," he said. Layla nodded. She led him through the house, past the hallway covered in children's drawings, past the framed photo of Nova asleep on Micah's shoulder. She didn't say a word. When they stepped onto the back deck, the twins sat under the maple tree, coloring in a spiral notebook. They looked up when they heard footsteps. Nova was the first to recognize him. She tilted her head. "You're the man from Mommy's stories." Micah blinked. "Mommy said you used to love us." Ethan dropped to his knees, his voice catching. "I still do," he whispered. "Every day. I didn't know how to find you." He pulled out 2 worn plush giraffes from the paper bag in his hand, the original ones he'd given Layla 5 years ago. One had a missing eye, the other a crooked ear. The twins gasped. "These were yours," Layla said softly, stunned. "I kept them." Ethan nodded. "All this time." Nova reached out first, clutching the toy to her chest. Micah leaned forward slowly, resting his head lightly against Ethan's knee. Ethan swallowed hard. He placed a trembling hand on Micah's back. "I missed so much," he said. The wind stirred the leaves above them, and the world fell silent momentarily. No past, no future. Just 3 people, 2 small, 1 trying, beginning again in the shade of something old that still had life left to give. The afternoon unfolded, not with fanfare, but with the soft steadiness of something almost sacred. Ethan stayed under the maple tree long after the twins had stopped asking questions and started building towers out of sticks and fallen leaves. He didn't press them. He didn't try to impress. He just stayed. At one point, Nova offered him a tiny purple crayon and insisted he draw a giraffe. He tried. It looked more like a banana with legs. She laughed and told him he wasn't very good at it. Micah disagreed. "I think it's a sleepy giraffe," he said, proud of his interpretation. Ethan smiled, grateful and quiet. He watched the 2 children interact like they had done this 1,000 times before, as if his presence hadn't shattered the carefully curated balance of their lives, but somehow settled into it. Layla stayed nearby, watching from the deck. She didn't interrupt or offer to take over when Nova insisted that Ethan pour her juice, or when Micah got frustrated that his leaf tower kept collapsing. She just observed. And something about the way she watched him, not with suspicion, not with fear, but with cautious wonder, reminded Ethan of a version of her he used to know. Later, when the kids had gone inside for naps and the backyard settled into golden hush, Ethan sat beside Layla on the wooden steps. The air smelled faintly of chalk and sun-warmed grass. "They're perfect," he said. She didn't answer right away. "They're strong," she finally replied. "Because they had to be." He nodded slowly. "I wasn't there." "No," she said. "You weren't." A pause stretched between them, not sharp, but heavy. "I want to be now," Ethan said, his voice low. "If you'll let me." Layla didn't look at him. She stared at the trees instead, her fingers curled loosely around the ceramic mug in her hands. "It's not just about showing up, Ethan," she said. "It's about staying." "I know," he whispered. "That's why I sold the New York condo." That made her turn. Her brow furrowed slightly, uncertain whether she'd heard correctly. "You what?" I sold it, he repeated, steady this time. And the apartment in Miami. I've moved back here. Permanently. Layla blinked. I don't need skyline views and glass walls anymore, he continued. I need mornings like this. I need juice boxes and sidewalk chalk. I want to know what cereal Micah likes and which songs Nova wants before bed. She searched his face, looking for cracks, but there weren't any, just something raw and resolute in his eyes. I'm not expecting forgiveness, Ethan added. Not today, not even soon, but I'm not here for a visit. I'm here to rebuild. In the weeks that followed, he kept his word. He didn't come with grand gestures or sweeping apologies. He came with consistency. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he picked the twins up from preschool. He sat on the floor during tantrums and patiently reassembled Lego castles toppled by tiny fists. He learned that Nova feared thunderstorms, and Micah refused to eat the crusts on his sandwiches. He read them stories before bed and didn't skip pages, even when tired. He took them to the park and carried them home when they fell asleep on his shoulders. Layla watched, sometimes from the hallway, sometimes from the kitchen window, sometimes sitting just a few feet away. She didn't say much, but Ethan noticed her gaze was no longer guarded. It had softened into something quieter, something like trust, learning how to breathe again. One rainy evening, Nova spiked a fever. Layla panicked. Even after years of pediatric work, even with all her knowledge, she couldn't shake the deep maternal dread when her daughter's skin burned under her palm and her tiny voice whined with discomfort. She was halfway through digging through the medicine cabinet when the doorbell rang. Ethan stood on the porch, drenched from the storm. In one hand, a thermometer. In the other, a box of grape popsicles. She asked for them, he said, not waiting for permission as he stepped inside. Layla stared at him, the panic ebbing in slow, disbelieving waves. You remembered. I listen now, he said. They sat on either side of Nova's bed, Layla stroking her daughter's curls as Ethan gently wiped her forehead. The room smelled faintly of lavender and rain. She asked if you'd still be here when she turns 5, Layla said quietly. Ethan's voice cracked as he answered, I'll be here when she's 50. And he meant it. That's sure. A few days later, the twins painted on the back patio, their hands and cheeks streaked with color. Ethan sat with Layla on the deck steps, his palms stained blue. I need to ask you something, she said. He straightened. Anything. Not as their father, she said. As the man I once loved. He held his breath. Why didn't you fight for me? She asked. Why didn't you come after me when I left? His jaw tensed. I was broken, he admitted. I thought letting you go was the noble thing. I thought I was sparing you. Her voice was steady, but her hands had gone still. It wasn't noble, Ethan. It was abandonment. He looked down. And I regret it every single day. Silence settled between them. You were always braver than I, he said quietly. But I'm learning now that courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means showing up, even when you are. Layla didn't respond, but she didn't turn away. That night, she found the letter in her mailbox after he left. No envelope, just folded pages with his handwriting, strong, familiar, and uneven. It was written to Micah and Nova, bits of memory, bits of apology, hopes he hadn't voiced out loud. He had written letters during those years apart, but never sent them. At the bottom of the last page, 6 words. Thank you for not erasing me. Layla sat quietly, the letter pressed to her chest, and let the tears fall. Not from pain this time, but from the strange and beautiful ache of knowing that some things, even when broken, can still be built again, if someone is brave enough to stay. The house was no longer quiet in the way it used to be, not in the mornings, when cereal crunches were accompanied by Nova's made-up songs and Micah's endless questions about clouds and time, and why toast always burned more on one side. This was not the case in the afternoons, when wooden blocks transformed the living room into cities and crayon masterpieces covered the kitchen table. And certainly not at night, when the sun dipped low and bedtime routines stretched into negotiations. One more story was never just one. Ethan had become part of the chaos, seamlessly, almost as if he'd always been there. He no longer knocked before coming through the door. Layla had long since given him a key. His name was now woven into the twins' routines, not as something new, but as someone remembered. There were drawings on the fridge labeled Daddy and Me. Micah had carried one of the old plush giraffes everywhere like a sidekick. But the small, unnoticed things changed Layla's mornings most. Like the way Ethan packed lunches with silly notes hidden in sandwich bags. Or how he remembered that Nova liked her socks mismatched just because it made her laugh. Or how he timed his arrival precisely to the minute after Layla's late shifts, stepping in with a smile and coffee before she even asked. One morning, she came downstairs to find Ethan and Micah standing at the kitchen counter, wearing matching aprons that said, Chefs of Chaos. There was pancake batter on the counter, blueberries rolling across the floor, and Nova sitting on the island, happily licking syrup off her fingers. Layla leaned against the doorway and watched them, unseen for a moment. Ethan's hair was tousled, and a smudge of flour was on his cheek. He looked up when Nova laughed, and for a second, his entire face softened into something unguarded, something only the kids had seen before. He caught Layla's eye. She didn't move. Neither did he. But something passed between them, a current of quiet acknowledgement of how far they had come and how carefully they'd held each step forward. Later that night, Layla sat beside Ethan on the couch after the twins had fallen asleep, tangled in each other's limbs. The lamp was dim. The room smelled faintly of vanilla and sleep. I used to think, she began, that being a good parent meant doing everything perfectly. He didn't respond, just turned to listen. But now, she continued, I think it's about showing up even when you're tired or scared, especially then. Ethan rested his hand gently over hers. Then I'm finally doing it right. She let the silence stretch. Not heavy, not filled with unsaid things, just full. Micah asked me today if you'd be here when he starts kindergarten, she said quietly. Ethan's breath caught. What did you say? I told him to ask you himself. He nodded, slow and sure. I'll be there. For that. For everything. The following weekend, the family visited the botanical garden. It was Nova's idea. She had been learning about butterflies in preschool and wanted to see a real one land on Daddy's nose. Ethan played along, even crouched near the zinnias for 10 minutes, while Nova tried to coax butterflies toward him with whispered encouragement and sticky fingers coated in melted fruit snacks. Layla trailed behind them, watching from a shaded bench, sunglasses hiding the way her eyes lingered a little too long. She started feeling something she hadn't dared in years. Safety. It wasn't the kind that came from knowing nothing could go wrong. It was the kind that came from knowing that she wouldn't be alone when things did. Later that evening, while the twins were painting on the patio, Layla pulled Ethan aside near the kitchen door. I've been thinking, she said. He raised an eyebrow. She hesitated. You've done more than show up. You've become something I didn't think you could be. I've had good teachers, he said softly. Layla took a breath, steadying herself. So I need to ask you something. Not as Nova and Micah's father. Not even as the man I fell in love with. Ethan's shoulders stiffened slightly. He waited. I need to ask you, she said, why you didn't come back for me sooner. Why didn't you fight? His face dropped with the weight of the question. He looked down, then up again, and said, because I thought I wasn't enough. Not for you. Not for them. I thought letting go was love. That silence was mercy. Layla blinked. You always had this idea that you needed to be perfect, but all I ever wanted was you. In the mess, in the doubt, in the truth. I was afraid that staying would expose everything broken in me, he said. And you didn't think I'd still choose you? She asked softly. He stepped closer. I didn't think I had the right to be chosen. The air between them shifted. Neither spoke. Then slowly, Layla reached for his hand and placed it gently over her heart. You're here now, she whispered, and that was enough. That night, she found something else waiting for her. A box, unmarked, tucked on the kitchen counter beside the toaster. Inside, folded neatly, were pages from Ethan's journals, handwritten letters to Micah and Nova. Some dated years ago, some are only days old, thoughts from the years he wasn't there, hopes, regrets, promises scribbled at 2 a.m. with tired ink. At the very bottom, on the last page, 6 words again. Thank you for not giving up. Layla sat alone in the quiet. The lights dimmed. The kids' laughter echoing faintly from upstairs. And she cried. Not from sadness, not from guilt, but from the unmistakable, overwhelming feeling of a heart remembering how to trust again. Because sometimes love isn't in the way you fall. It's in the way you stay. Summer settled over Atlanta with the warmth of a memory, soft, golden, and heavy with the scent of blooming hydrangeas. Mornings came earlier, light sneaking through the curtains before alarm clocks could stir anyone. Layla woke with less effort, as if her body had started syncing with something quieter than urgency, something steadier than survival. Ethan had slipped into their lives like rain into soil, unnoticed at first, then suddenly essential. He no longer asked for permission to exist in the everyday. He folded laundry. He remembered where Nova's favorite spoon was. He kept Micah's growing collection of rock treasures in a small glass jar on his dresser. And when Layla came home late, he waited with the porch light on and her tea already steeping. One afternoon, as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, the twins played with sidewalk chalk on the driveway, creating rainbows and wild animals with too many legs. Ethan knelt beside them, sleeves rolled up, hands streaked with pink and blue dust. Layla watched from his window, a quiet ache blooming in her chest, not of sadness, but of something too complex to name. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or the tentative peace of finally trusting the ground beneath her feet. But that night, while brushing her teeth, she noticed something else. A flicker, a pause, a beat that shouldn't have skipped. Ethan had risen from the couch too quickly when Nova called. His hand had gone to his chest, casually, like brushing away a yawn. But she'd seen the wince, the too long stillness that followed, and he shook it off, smiling. Too fast, too light. Later, when the twins had fallen asleep under a blanket fort and Ethan sat beside her on the back steps with fireflies dancing in the dark, she asked him. Ben, she said, using the softer tone that crept in only when she was afraid. How's your heart? He didn't answer right away. He turned his face toward the garden, the night air catching the silver just beginning at his temples. Stable, he said finally. She raised an eyebrow. That's not an answer. He exhaled slowly. The episode at the hospital, the one at the event, it wasn't my first. Layla's breath caught. How long? Off and on, he said. Symptoms started showing maybe a year ago, but I kept thinking, one more quarter, project, and day. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to worry you. You didn't want to lose us again, she said quietly. He nodded. You don't get to protect me from my decisions, she said firmly. Not anymore. We're not building this on omissions and noble excuses. Ethan looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once built tech empires and now struggled to cut sandwiches into perfect triangles. I'm not dying, he said, voice hoarse. But I've been pretending I'm invincible. And I'm not. Layla moved closer, placed her palm over his, grounding him. Then let's stop pretending, she whispered. The next morning, Ethan checked himself into the cardiology unit. No alarms, no fanfare. Just a quiet signature on a clipboard and a room with a view of the hospital garden. He was scheduled for a procedure to regulate his heart rhythm, which was not invasive, but serious. The recovery would be long. The restrictions would be many. Layla stayed every day. She juggled patient charts, school pickups, balanced juice boxes, and pre-op questions. Malcolm came by with groceries and silent support, never asking where the lines now fell between past and present. Micah made cards from construction paper and asked if the hospital had enough jelly beans. Nova drew a picture of a heart with glitter glue and told every nurse who'd listen, "This one's for my dad. He's got a sparkly heart." Layla taped it to the wall beside Ethan's bed. There were moments when it felt unbearable. Seeing him pale and groggy after the procedure, tubes and monitors echoing with mechanical rhythm. Watching him flinch at blood pressure cuffs or struggle to sit up too fast. The way he whispered, almost ashamed, "I hate that they have to see me like this." But Layla said, "They need to see that you're human, that you're strong in ways that don't wear suits." And so, recovery began. Slowly. Each day brought more color back to his face. The twins' laughter in the hallway made him sit a little taller. Layla brought soup in thermoses and schedules scribbled on Post-its, until Ethan joked she was running her small command center in the corner of his hospital room. When he was discharged, he didn't return to a penthouse. He came home, to the place that smelled like glue sticks and lemon-scented floor cleaner, to the living room, where a banner, handmade and crooked, read, "Welcome home, Daddy." Andrew jumped into his arms. Nova handed him a new giraffe plushie, smaller than the first two, but stitched with little felt stars. "Because you're a little magic," she said. That evening, while Layla folded laundry and the kids built a fort under the dining table, Ethan stepped into the doorway and watched them, the three hearts that had pulled his back into rhythm. He didn't say anything, but he knew, in every beat of his repaired heart, that this was the life he hadn't planned for. And yet, it was the only one that made sense. It wasn't a comeback. It was becoming. A life not earned through apology or sacrifice, but through presence, daily, steady, imperfect. Ethan Walker no longer chased legacy. He chased sunlight on the kitchen tile. He chased the sound of his daughter laughing behind the curtains. He chased time, not to outrun it, but to meet it where it mattered most. The house no longer resembled the quiet, orderly space Layla had once tried to maintain during her years alone. It was alive now, cluttered, but with the kind of disarray that spoke of belonging. Finger paintings curled on the edges of the refrigerator. A trail of puzzle pieces stretched beneath the dining table. Stuffed animals lounged on the couch like old friends refusing to leave. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Ethan sat cross-legged on the living room rug, helping Nova tape googly eyes onto a cardboard rocket, while Micah balanced a book upside down on his head, attempting to walk in a straight line. Layla leaned against the doorframe, watching them as soft afternoon light pooled on the hardwood floor. Her hands were damp from washing dishes, but the warmth spreading through her chest had nothing to do with the water. "You're going to break your neck," she called out to Micah gently. "I'm learning gravity," he declared confidently, arms flailing slightly for balance. Nova didn't look up. "Daddy says gravity is loyal, but also unforgiving." Ethan chuckled. "Which is why we don't climb the kitchen counters anymore." Layla rolled her eyes. "One time, and I was asleep for 5 minutes. It was enough," Ethan murmured, mock solemn. The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It didn't echo, but it settled into the walls and the very foundation, like the house had been holding its breath and finally could exhale. That evening, after the kids had been tucked in and the night had taken on its usual hush, Layla and Ethan sat on the back porch beneath a tangle of string lights. The air was warm and smelled faintly of basil from the herb box she'd planted months ago, back when she still wasn't sure what was growing or what might survive. Ethan was thumbing through one of the old journals he'd left behind the last time he was in the hospital, the ones filled with letters to Micah and Nova he'd written long before he knew them. "I forgot about this one," he said, flipping to a dog-eared page. Layla leaned closer, their shoulders brushing. "Read it." His voice was softer now than it used to be, less performative, more lived in. "Dear Nova, if you are anything like the dream of you I carry, then you're curious and relentless and probably talking too much during class. I hope you always keep asking questions, even the ones that scare you. I hope you're not afraid to be loud when the world asks for silence." He paused, clearing his throat. "And Micah, I hope you know it's okay to cry. That strength doesn't always sound like shouting. That listening is a power. That your kindness will be the thing that sets you apart." He stopped reading, just held the book in his lap, thumbing the spine. Layla reached for his hand. "There's so much like that," she said. "Like what you imagined." Ethan nodded, eyes still on the page. "I used to write to ghosts, and now they're real. They're messy and funny and stubborn. And loved," she added quietly. Ethan looked up at her then, his expression unguarded. "And what about you? What about me? Do you still feel like you're doing this alone?" Her breath caught. There had been so many versions of alone. The kind where she'd cried into her pillow, fearing for her baby's futures. The kind where she'd kept her chin up and smiled through parent-teacher meetings with only one name on the paperwork. The kind where she'd told herself she didn't miss Ethan, even when she did. And now, there was this. A man beside her, battle-worn, but still standing. A home full of small sounds. A life not built in a straight line, but one that somehow still held shape. "No," she said softly. "Not anymore." The following week, the twins started kindergarten. Layla had packed their backpacks the night before, labeling every crayon box and tucking hand wipes into tiny zippered pockets. Ethan had stayed up late writing notes for their lunch boxes, each with a drawing. Nova got a starship with curly hair. Micah, a dinosaur wearing glasses. That morning, both parents walked the kids to the school gate. Nova waved confidently at everyone, declaring she was ready for intellectual expansion. Micah clung to Ethan's hand a little longer, his lips tight with worry, until Ethan knelt and whispered something only he could hear. Layla stood back and watched as the kids finally let go, their little sneakers disappearing into the bright hallway. Ethan slipped on his sunglasses, but not before she saw him blink quickly, his jaw flexing. "You okay?" she asked. "I was fine until Micah told me he'd make new friends. But I'd always be his favorite person." Her heart squeezed. They stood there longer, watching the doorway like waiting to be called back. They weren't. So they turned and walked to the car, quietly. Back home, the house felt too still. No questions, no giggles, no fights over which cartoon theme song gets to play first. Layla made tea. Ethan wandered the hallway, stopping at the twins' artwork on the walls. "This is the first day," he said eventually. She looked up. "Of what?" "Of the rest of it," he replied. "The mornings we wake up and realize we're not chasing anymore. We're living it." She nodded, letting the truth of it settle. Later that evening, when the kids were home again, covered in glitter and stories, they ate spaghetti on the patio. It was chaotic and loud and perfect. At some point, Nova dropped her fork and asked, "Mommy, what's the most important thing you ever did?" Layla paused, sauce still clinging to her fingertips. Before she could answer, Ethan leaned forward. "Choosing to come back," he said, "and staying." The words weren't just for Nova, and they weren't only his. They were theirs. The sky was pale with early autumn, soft clouds drifting like pulled cotton across a golden afternoon. Leaves had begun their slow turn, edges tinged with amber and crimson, though the warmth still clung stubbornly to the air. The family returned to the meadow for the first time in years, the one tucked just beyond the city's edge, where time always seemed to move a little slower. It was Nova's idea. She had overheard Ethan discussing a significant place where something big once happened, and decided they needed to go. "So the place won't forget us," she'd explained, with all the gravity of a philosopher in a tutu. Intrigued but skeptical, Micah packed 3 granola bars, 2 juice boxes, and his favorite rock, just in case we need to prove we were here. They arrived mid-afternoon, the sun low and golden, painting everything it touched in warm light. The tall grass rippled with the wind. Wildflowers peeked through in bursts of blue and yellow, and in the center of it all stood the old oak tree, larger now, or perhaps more rooted in memory. Layla stepped out of the car first. She hadn't been back since that day, the day she handed Ethan the engagement ring with trembling fingers and eyes filled with dreams she could no longer silence. Her hand brushed against the fabric of her coat, as if trying to remember the weight of that tiny velvet box all over again. Ethan walked behind her now, the twins skipping ahead, their laughter echoing between the trees. He carried the picnic basket. She had the rest. They didn't speak for a while, just spread out a blanket and let the quiet settle around them. Nova braided flowers into Layla's curls, fingers delicate and determined. Micah lay flat on his back, watching the clouds shift, pointing out imaginary dragons and invisible ships. Ethan opened a book, but didn't read it. His eyes drifted to the tree, Layla, and the soft rise and fall of his children's breath. Eventually, Layla rose and walked toward the oak. It was exactly as she remembered. The same weathered bark, the same carved initials, faint now, almost swallowed by time. E+L. She pressed her palm against the trunk. It felt solid, familiar, and forgiving. Ethan approached quietly. "She looks different," he said. Layla tilted her head. "She?" "The tree." Layla smiled faintly. "Maybe she just waited for us to grow into her." He glanced down, towing the edge of a fallen leaf. "You remember what I said here that day?" "I remember everything," she said. "I thought I was asking you to build forever," he whispered. "But I didn't realize forever needs more than love." It needs truth, and timing, and showing up. Layla turned toward him. And now? Ethan looked at her. Looked. I think forever starts over, he said. Every time we choose each other. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped into him. Not suddenly, not urgently, just as if she had never left that space at all. He wrapped his arms around her, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the rhythm of a heart she had once feared would stop without her. I miss this place, she murmured. It missed you back. They stayed there until the wind picked up and the kids called for snacks. Later, with twilight settling around them, the family sprawled on the blanket like pieces of a constellation. Nova curled against Ethan's side, fingers tangled in his shirt. Micah leaned against Layla, chewing the end of a pretzel and asking, Do you think this place remembers everything? Layla ran her hand through his curls. Places remember what we leave behind. Micah thought about that. So, it remembers when you were sad? She nodded. Yes. But now we're not. No, she said, smiling softly. Now we're something else. Ethan reached over, brushing a leaf from her shoulder. I used to think I knew what my life would look like, he said. Clean lines, control, a version of success that had no room for unpredictability. Layla raised an eyebrow. And now? Now I wake up covered in cereal and glitter, with two small humans yelling about toothpaste flavors. And I've never been more certain of anything. She chuckled, laying her head back on the blanket. Sometimes, she whispered, it feels like the hardest things had to happen. To break us open. To make space for this. Ethan didn't respond. He just reached for her hand and laced their fingers together. The meadow faded into dusk. Nova began to hum softly. A tune she had made up. Something about stars, pancakes, and bravery. Micah eventually fell asleep, his cheek pressed against Layla's thigh. And Ethan, watching them all, thought not of what he had lost, but of what had somehow found its way back. Not as a second chance, but as the only one that had ever truly mattered. The first cold rain of October came quietly. No thunder, no dramatic wind, just a steady, whispering drizzle that wrapped the house in stillness. The windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside, and the usual scent of cinnamon from the candle on the kitchen counter mingled with the earthy dampness of wet leaves carried in on the twins' boots. Layla sat at the dining table, slowly peeling a clementine for Nova, who insisted they tasted sweeter when someone else did the work. Across the table, Ethan helped Micah tape together the torn pages of his favorite picture book, the one about a fox who didn't know where he belonged, until he did. It was a quiet evening, ordinary. But within that ordinariness, Layla had come to find something resembling peace. And yet, a restlessness stirred beneath her skin. No doubt, not regret, just something that didn't quite have a name. It wasn't about Ethan being there. He had proven himself in all the ways that mattered, showing up, staying, learning every crease of their lives, and folding himself into them without asking to be praised. But love, she had learned, isn't just about presence. It's about honesty, especially when it's inconvenient. That night, after the twins were asleep, Nova with her giraffe tucked under one arm, Micah halfway out of his blanket as usual. Layla found Ethan in the kitchen, rinsing dishes with his sleeves rolled up and his back slightly tense from a day spent crouching over cardboard castles. She leaned against the counter. "There's something I need to ask you," she said softly. Ethan turned, surprised by the tone. "What is it?" "Not as their father," she added. "Not even as my partner." He dried his hands slowly, giving her his full attention. "As the man I once trusted more than anyone," she said. and the man who broke that trust. The words landed like a hush between them. Ethan didn't flinch. He just waited. "Why didn't you fight?" she asked, her voice quiet but unshaking. "When I walked away. When I gave you the ring. Why didn't you run after me? Why didn't you try?" He exhaled, not from frustration, but from a weight he had carried for too long. "I think part of me believed you were already halfway gone," he said. "And the other part, the part that wasn't completely broken yet, thought I was doing something noble by letting you go." Layla looked down at the floor. "It wasn't noble," she said. "It was abandonment. And I had to convince myself every day that your silence was mercy, that it wasn't proof that I had been wrong about you." He moved closer, stopping a few feet from her, not to close the distance too quickly, but to leave space for the truth to breathe. "I didn't think I deserved to be chased," he said. "Not after everything. Not with what I thought I couldn't give you." She nodded, slowly. "But you were wrong. I know." Another silence. "This one is softer." "I read every one of your letters," she said. "The ones you left in the box. I thought they would make me cry. But they didn't." Ethan's brow furrowed. "No, they made me angry," she confessed. "Because you could write those things, feel those things, dream about them, and still not pick up the phone." His voice cracked. "I didn't think I had the right." "You always had the right," she said. "What you didn't have was the courage." Her words weren't meant to wound. They were true, sharpened not by bitterness, but by years of carrying it in silence. But Ethan didn't shrink from them. He nodded, taking them in like medicine he knew would sting before it healed. "I don't want to rewrite the past," Layla continued. "I just needed to know that you understand how much it cost me." "I do," he said. "Every day I wake up here and see your face and hear them laugh. I know I miss things I can never get back, but I'm here. Not because I regret what I lost, but because I want to earn what still exists." Layla stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Then you need to stop waiting for me to forget the pain," she said. "Because I won't. I live with it. It made me who I am. But I want to stop punishing you for it. And for that, I need your truth. All of it." Ethan reached for her hand then, not to pull her in, just to be allowed to hold something steady. "I was afraid," he said, "that love meant exposure. If you saw all of me, the fear, the brokenness, the failure, you'd leave. So I tried to be perfect, even as I unraveled. And when I couldn't hold it anymore, I thought silence would save us from watching it all fall apart." She squeezed his fingers. "But silence is its kind of violence," she said. He nodded. They stood in the quiet hum of the kitchen, the dishwasher humming faintly behind them, a nightlight glowing dimly down the hall. Then Layla asked the question she hadn't dared before. "If I hadn't brought them into the world, would you have come back?" Ethan swallowed. "Yes," he said, "but I would have come back smaller, lonelier, because they didn't give me the reason. They gave me the chance. But you've always been the reason." Layla didn't cry. Instead, she stepped into him, rested her head against his shoulder, and exhaled like someone finally surrendering the weight of what they no longer needed to carry alone. There, in that kitchen, with its chipped backsplash and coffee stains on the counter, they stood. Not two people pretending nothing had ever been broken, but two people who had chosen to stay in the story, even after the chapters became too hard to read aloud. And somewhere deep in that quiet, the unfinished corners of their love began to unfold, not with certainty, but with hope. And sometimes, that's enough. It began with a broken shoelace. Micah had been halfway down the stairs, one sneaker on and the other dangling from his hand, when the lace snapped. He looked up at Ethan with wide, distressed eyes. Standing at the kitchen island in the middle of packing lunchboxes, Ethan smiled and walked over. He crouched in front of Micah, took the shoe gently from his hands, and without saying a word, knotted the lace so neatly that even Nova, who was usually the household's appointed expert on fancy tying, couldn't find a flaw. Micah grinned. "You're better at that than Mommy." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That's dangerous to say this early in the morning." Nova giggled from the doorway. "Don't worry, I'll tell her." Layla appeared behind them, just in time to catch that. "You'll tell me what?" she asked, arching a brow. Nova opened her mouth, but Ethan swooped in with a perfectly timed distraction, holding up the lunchboxes like trophies. Packed and ready. Peanut butter and jelly. Crusts removed. Grapes halved. Cheese cubes arranged according to preference. Micah nodded in approval. "My cubes are square. Nova's are star-shaped." "You're getting good at this," Layla murmured, almost more to herself than to him. Ethan looked at her, soft and amused. "I'm just following orders." But she knew he wasn't. He was listening, not just to the words spoken aloud, but to the quiet rhythms of their mornings, the pause before Nova needed a hug. This silence meant Micah had misplaced his book again, the way she needed 5 minutes alone with her coffee before engaging in conversation that required eye contact. He was becoming fluent in their life, and their life was beginning to make room for him, not as a visitor or even a returnee, but as something fixed, essential. Like a load-bearing beam, you didn't know you'd been leaning against until it finally held its weight. Da-da-tee. A few days later, Layla came home from a late shift to find the lights in the hallway dimmed, the twins already tucked in, and Ethan on the couch with a blanket thrown loosely over his legs, reading one of Nova's chapter books. He looked up when she entered, the corners of his mouth curling without a word. "Long day?" he asked. She dropped her bag by the door, sighed, and joined him on the couch, letting her head fall onto his shoulder. "Long life," she murmured, "but getting shorter in the best ways." They sat like that for a while, not needing to speak. Eventually, he broke the silence. "I was thinking about buying the house." Layla didn't move. "This one?" He nodded. "I know it's not mine. Not really. You picked the tiles, the curtains, and the backyard swing. You decided where the spice rack goes and which drawer holds the scissors that never work." She smiled into his shoulder. "It's always the third drawer. But I'd like to invest in it," he said. "Not as a guest or a partner, but as someone who wants to be accountable to the walls that see us daily." Layla leaned back and looked at him. He met her gaze without hesitation. "It's not just a place," he continued. "It's become us. And I want to belong to it in a way that isn't invisible." The vulnerability in his voice was subtle, but unmistakable. Layla didn't respond right away. She reached down instead and laced her fingers with his. "You already belong here," she said. "You always did. You just needed to walk through the door." That Sunday, they took the twins apple picking. It was a 2-hour drive to a farm outside the city, nestled between hills and flanked by tall trees that had just begun their red and amber bloom. Nova insisted on wearing overalls. Micah wore his backpack just in case, and Ethan drove with the windows down, his hand resting on the space between the seats, close enough for Layla to slip hers over it now and then. They walked rows of apple trees, laughing as Micah tried to carry more than he could hold. Nova picked apples based on vibe, not ripeness. Layla took pictures with an old film camera she used in college, and Ethan, watching them with arms full of bags and sunlight slanting across his face, Looked like he'd stepped out of a life that had once only existed in a letter. Afterward, they sat under a tree eating sandwiches from home, the twins drowsy with sun and sugar. Layla leaned against Ethan's side, her cheek against his shoulder. "This feels unfair," she whispered. He turned to her. "Unfair? To have something so soft," she said, "after everything." Ethan looked at their children, curled against a picnic blanket, shoes kicked off, hair tousled by the wind, then back at her. "No," he said, "this is exactly what's fair. It's what we built from the wreckage." Layla pressed her lips together, nodding. "And it's still messy," he added after a moment. "There will be mistakes, sick days, fights about vegetables, tantrums over bedtime songs," she said, smiling. "And one day," he continued, "questions we won't have answers to, wounds we can't fix. But love anyway," she finished. He looked at her as if the wind had just shifted in her direction. "Yes," he said, "love anyway." That night, after the twins were asleep and the house had returned to its quiet hum, Layla found Ethan pouring 2 glasses of water in the kitchen. She leaned against the door frame, as she always did when she didn't want to interrupt the stillness but needed to be part of it. "I know what the house is missing," she said. He turned, curious. "Your handwriting," she said, "on something that stays." Before the sun had risen the next morning, she watched him from the study doorway. He was kneeling on the floor beside a low wooden shelf, a Sharpie in hand, writing in small, careful letters on the inside lip of the bookcase. "Micah's first wobbly tooth fell out here. Nova spilled glitter that never entirely disappeared. Layla laughed so hard here that she cried. Ethan came home for good. A home is not just where life happens. It's where life leaves its mark. And this one, at last, was beginning to wear all of theirs. The year began folding into its final months. Mornings carried a chill that clung to the windows, and dusk fell earlier now, brushing each evening with a quiet intimacy. The trees that once bloomed with warmth now let go of their leaves without protest, and the house on Pine Hill Lane seemed to lean into this rhythm, settled, content, unafraid of change. It was a Saturday. Rain tapped gently against the roof like a second heartbeat, and inside the house, the scent of waffles and maple syrup lingered in the kitchen. The twins were building a sprawling city out of cardboard boxes and couch cushions in the living room. Nova had assigned herself the mayor role, while Micah argued passionately about traffic laws involving stuffed animals. In the study, Layla stood barefoot by the window, tracing the glass with her fingertips, watching the world blur outside. Behind her, Ethan was crouched beside the fireplace, coaxing a reluctant flame from a nest of kindling and old newspaper. The crackle finally caught, a soft burst of light warming the shadows in the room. "You always had a strange talent for making fires," she said, turning slightly toward him. He looked over his shoulder, grinning. Childhood camping trips, and a lot of trial by smoke. She stepped closer, kneeling beside him on the rug, their faces lit by the small flicker between them. "It's not just the fire," she said, eyes gentle. "It's everything lately. You're present." Ethan shrugged, a softness behind the motion. "I spent many years chasing a life I thought I wanted, and when it collapsed, I thought I'd lost everything. But maybe that was the only way I could learn to recognize what real joy looks like." Layla leaned into him, her voice barely more than a breath. "And does this feel like joy?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he cupped the side of her face, his thumb brushing the corner of her mouth. "It feels like home," he said. Later that day, they took the twins to the library, an old brick building with creaky wooden floors, and the kind of silence that felt like reverence, not restriction. Nova darted straight to the fairy tale section. Micah lingered by the science shelves, choosing a book about space with serious consideration. Ethan sat at one of the round tables near the window, flipping through a book he barely read, more focused on watching Layla as she walked down the aisle toward him, arms full of books, her laugh low and unguarded when Nova insisted on checking out 12 titles. He felt something in his chest then, not excitement, not surprise, but a quiet awe that she was still here, that they were all here. On the drive home, Micah fell asleep with a book resting on his stomach, and Nova quietly narrated the story of a brave princess who saved herself and built a kingdom out of kindness. Layla reached across the gear shift, resting her hand on Ethan's knee. No words, just warmth. That evening, they found an old box in the attic. One, Layla had forgotten she even kept it. Inside were pictures from college, a few dried flowers, and handwritten letters folded into neat squares. Among them was a postcard, unsent. Ethan turned it over. His name was written on the back in Layla's handwriting, but the space for a message remained blank. "I bought it the week I found out I was pregnant," she said quietly. "I thought maybe I'd mail it. Thought maybe one day I'd know what to say." He looked at her, the unspoken words settling gently between them. "I'm glad you didn't," he said, "because we're not who we were back then. We needed to become the people who could finally speak without fear." She slipped the postcard back into the box, with a slight smile this time, then added a new note to it. Today's date scribbled in the corner, followed by a simple line, "We are here now." And that is everything. Weeks passed. The city prepared for winter with twinkling lights, scarves pulled tighter, and soup pots back on stovetops. Inside their home, time moved in slower shapes. Books were read aloud. Forts were built and collapsed. Burnt toast happened. Apologies were made. Laughter often came out of nowhere, unexpected and whole. Some nights, Ethan found Layla working late at the dining table, her laptop open, curls tucked behind one ear. He would bring her tea, kiss the top of her head, and never ask how long she'd stay up. Some mornings, she found him asleep on the couch, with one of the twins wrapped in a blanket on his chest, snoring quietly. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. On the first snow of the season, the four stood on the front porch, watching the flakes fall in a hush. Nova reached out her hand and gasped. "They're like tiny stars." Micah squinted up at the sky. "Do you think snow has a memory?" Layla smiled. "Of what?" "Of everything," he said. "Of everyone it lands on." Ethan pulled them both closer, one child under each arm. "If it does," he whispered, "then this snow will remember something beautiful." Layla turned to look at him, not just with love, but with recognition. Because in the slow, quiet unfolding of the seasons, through the fractured beginnings and mended middles, they had built something that weathered every doubt, every silence, every almost. They had built a family, not out of ease, but out of effort, not out of perfect moments, but out of real ones. And as the snow settled on their shoulders, the porch light glowing behind them, Ethan reached into his coat pocket and quietly pressed something into Layla's hand. It was the same velvet box, but inside, a different ring. No promises this time. No performances. Just a straightforward truth written in the way he looked at her. We came back. We stayed. And we are still choosing each other, every single day. Years have a strange way of moving. Slow in heartbreak, swift in joy, and constantly shifting just when you think you understand their rhythm. The days that once felt impossible became stories retold over dinners, folded into memory like well-worn pages. And as time passed in the house on Pine Hill Lane, love didn't just stay, it evolved. One spring afternoon, the garden bloomed wildly. Layla stood on the back porch, her hands lightly dusted with soil, a straw hat slipping to one side of her head. Ethan was kneeling nearby, helping Micah dig a small trench for the mint plant he insisted on growing for science. Nova sat cross-legged beside them, drawing the garden from her perspective. Every leaf given a face, every flower a name. It wasn't grand, it wasn't extraordinary, but it was full. The full that came from quiet resilience. The kind that didn't announce itself with fanfare, but with the gentle brush of fingers in passing, with coffee made just right, with the unshaken knowledge that if one of them fell, the other would kneel beside them, not to lift immediately, but to sit, to stay, to share the ground until they could rise again. Inside the house, traces of their journey lived on. A framed photo on the wall captured the four wrapped in scarves, holding hands in the snow. Glued at the tail, a ceramic fox sat by the windowsill. Micah's first school project, nearly thrown away, now a family joke. There were faint pen marks on the kitchen wall, measuring the twins' growth every few months. And in the corner of the study, beneath a stack of books, lay the unsent postcard Layla once thought would carry her grief, now a symbol, not of what was lost, but what was reclaimed. On a summer night, they held a small celebration in the backyard. Just a few close friends, paper lanterns hung from the fence, soft music playing from a speaker that occasionally crackled when someone walked too close. The twins chased fireflies, barefoot in the grass, while Layla and Ethan sat together on a blanket near the garden. She leaned into him, her curls brushing his shoulder. "You remember when we couldn't look each other in the eye?" she whispered. "I remember everything," he said. She smiled. "Do you still carry regret?" Ethan shook his head gently. "Only gratitude. For the second chance. For the work. For you." Their fingers intertwined. A quiet seal on the vows they'd never spoken aloud, but lived every day. In the distance, laughter echoed. Layla watched the children spin beneath the trees and thought, this is what healing looks like. Not perfection, not forgetting, but showing up, again and again, with open hands. One rainy morning, years later, Nova asked Layla how she and Ethan fell in love. Layla looked out the window, watching droplets slide down the glass like memories finding their way back. "We didn't fall," she said. "We broke. We drifted. We lost each other." Nova's brow furrowed. "Then how did it work?" Layla turned to her daughter and smiled with eyes that held stories Nova hadn't yet lived. "We remembered," she said, "and we chose." Dear listener, if you've followed this story until now, it wasn't about a perfect man or a flawless woman. It wasn't about magic or fate or happily ever after. It was about two flawed and fragile people who once stood on the edge of love's wreckage and decided to rebuild. Brick by brick, word by word, forgiveness by forgiveness. You too carry a postcard never sent, or a question that never found a voice. Maybe there's someone you once loved who became a ghost in your story. But remember this: love does not always return with thunder or flowers. Sometimes it knocks softly. Sometimes it just shows up, carrying bags full of apologies and hands that tremble. And if you're lucky, if both hearts are willing, it stays. Thank you for being part of this journey. If this story touched you, let us know. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and follow the channel for more stories like this. Stories that remind us, even in the quietest corners, love still dares to begin again.